Hello, everybody. How are you? I hope you're all really good. I'm excited to be just back again, as I am like every single week. It feels really good to be kind of coming into the third kind of episode in this series. It feels like it's gone quite quickly as well. So yeah, I think it's time to kind of start and to just welcome everyone onto the settee into the front room. As many of you may or may not know, this is kind of the new part of our season. I'm just trying to get my notes up. That's all a bit like, just bear with me 1 second. Where did you go? Sorry, small technical difficulties. Okay, apologies. Sorry, my internet was not being very helpful and I couldn't find my notes. Okay, so I just want to welcome everyone onto the settee today and just here in this talk. I hope that you're all kind of feeling not too down if the weather isn't bad where you are as it is here. So welcome into the front room, which is the beginning of an ambitious long-term neighbourhood platform in Birmingham to be designed, grown and co-owned by local communities. For those of you who are joining us for like the first time, welcome. I just want to tell you a little bit about what On the Settee actually is. So in the front room, the settee offers a place of sanctuary, a place where you can kind of take a load off. And on our settee, you'll discover conversations that will slot into your day, like catch up with an old friend or your like favorite song or something that makes you feel at home, and open yet vulnerable and connected kind of with yourself. So this current season of On the Settee features a range of folks from across Birmingham and kind of beyond, who are within the writing, reading and book selling community. So books and reading kind of, give us access to kind of ideas, experiences and stories, and can be found at the heart of kind of exploring yourself and the world around you. So within this series, we're kind of touching on questions like who are writing the stories, who's sharing their experience and who's kind of being heard, what voices are being excluded or included, and how are books kind of being accessed in the city and around kind of the UK. So I'm your host, Danny Vance Ingram, also known as Zaz or Zazu, and today I'll be speaking to Sophia Sanghia, who is a recent publishing graduate and a book reviewer who is like in our city in Birmingham, in Swedwick, right down the road from Civic Square. So Sophia, hello. Just to let everyone know that the Q&A is kind of open, whether you're with us here in Zoom or you're watching on YouTube. Please feel free to just drop us your questions and they will find their way to us. So, hi Sophia, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's nice to just be here again for the third episode in this series. So, if you could just tell us a little bit about you, who you are, what you kind of do, and then we'll crack on to some questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. As Zaz mentioned, I am a recent publishing graduate. I graduated last year, but it kind of feels weird because I haven't actually graduated yet because of COVID. I now work in publishing. I am an account executive at Midas, which is essentially like a book publicist. I have also been reviewing books online for about 8 years now, YA and children's books mainly, and that's about me, really.
Yeah, amazing. It's kind of interesting for you to even say like you graduated, but kind of like not technically, because COVID, it's like a really weird time that's just like happening, and I'm always like, oh yeah, that's like a real thing. How does that even feel to be like I did the thing, but like the ceremony thing?
Yeah, especially now because I'm in a full-time job, it just feels weird because I've now been told that my ceremony's in November, so a year and a half after I graduated. So it's just all over the place.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. But you
Yeah.
think, and you're like in a job, so it's
Yes, I am.
fine.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of start with just touching on kind of what your early memories are around kind of books and what that kind of means for you, because there's always those early moments, right? There's kind of
Yeah.
stepping stones that you might have like felt at the time were just really normal and nothing out of
Yeah.
then you look back and you're like, oh, those moments actually weren't small, they were like the
Yeah.
beginning of the thing. So what are some of your kind of early moments, ideas or experiences around books for you? Like what are your memories around that?
Yeah, I have a lot of memories from when I was younger of reading, like especially like my friendship group in primary school, we all used to read. I remember, I think for most kids, the Scholastic Book Fair was like a big thing every year. Whenever it came around, everyone was so excited about like spending tokens and buying books. And I remember like fighting with some friends over one particular book that we all wanted. And then I also remember like a lot of weekly trips to the library because my mom always used to take us, and doing like summer reading challenges. I kind of just grew up reading, and that kind of stuck with me through there. And that's how I just didn't really stop. I started from a young age, and I don't remember like a turning point where I started reading. It was just always a part of my upbringing, really. So that's like my very early memories of reading.
See, I love that, the book fair. Like I
Yeah.
always like remember like the book fair, and like I was really excited about kind of going home with like a new bookmark
Mm.
and be like, I bought this book and I've got my bookmark and all of these
Yeah.
more kind of like little things. I also kind of have a lot of memories around like the library, like I'm sure it's probably like, similar to you as well. And it's quite interesting to think back on early memories, because you're kind of like, was that early? Like, was that, did it, because it's all
Yeah.
normal and you're like, what does
Yeah. When did this happen? Yeah,
yeah.
I remember because I used to love like, when you did the summer reading challenge with the library and like getting stickers and being like, oh, I read like a certain number of books, or I ticked off this particular challenge that was a part of it. Like I loved getting like stickers and different things and badges and certificates and being like, oh, you read this many books.
Yeah, because they're literally the things that like they're the little like joy moments, right?
Yeah.
I did this, and it's almost
Yeah.
like, I think when I think back to reading, like when I was a kid, I almost connect more with like what was surrounding me and like my environment, like how reading like made me feel. And it was like, okay,
Yeah.
when I'd gone on holiday, I'd be like at the pool with like my book, and I'd be like, reminding my dad like a week before, like I need to go and like get the next book in this like
Yeah.
because like, I can't be like away from the library and not have like the book that I need, right?
Yeah.
And there's like those like little things which I think are really interesting, because yeah, they're never small moments, but I love what you kind of said about it just being like really normal and almost like these little like challenges, and like, oh, I read
Yeah.
pages, and like, what does it mean to be like, I read this many pages? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very much like part of the challenges around like, and good challenges around like how we learn stuff and how we start to connect with
Yeah.
the jigsaw puzzle kind of thing. Where sometimes even now I'll be reading something and I'm like, oh, this I have like 20 more pages to the next chapter or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Especially for kids, I feel like it makes a big difference. Like
Yeah.
when you give them like prizes and stuff, like it was like I wanted all the prizes, I wanted to win everything. So that's why like we would read a lot in the summer reading challenge, just win everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like a winning and a reading and
Yeah.
such a really like fun process, like, and obviously it's hard for me to think back to like what that really felt like as a kid, because now I've just got like my adult brain.
Yeah.
The joy of that is it's hard to kind of tap back into, but when I see kids reading now,
Yeah.
like they're just totally like in the thing, right? And it's like really nice to see that, and almost like know that the way they're like eating up these stories, like
Yeah.
their curiosity as well, and like
Yeah.
what does that look like? Or because we do book shares on the boat, and sometimes you like give a kid a book and you can just see them be like so
Yeah.
to open that thing, and it's really like a beautiful kind of moment. So yeah, thanks for kind of like talking about your like early memories.
Yeah.
Again, nicely kind of segues us on to what that means when your early memories, your early kind of normality around books, around reading, around that kind of joy, what that means when it kind of can get it goes into more theory kind of based things. And I wanted to speak a little bit about your dissertation. One, because I just like when we kind of touched on it like really, really lightly when we had the chat before kind of this. I'd really like you to just maybe speak a little bit about that, like just around like what came out of that for you, like what were the things that were like uncovered, what did you explore, you know, what was it like telling you about like YA literature, diversity and representation, what was that?
Yeah. So I knew before I started my degree that I wanted to write my dissertation on YA books in particular and diversity within YA books. I was known throughout my entire degree. I was the only person of color in my degree, but I was known for basically any conversation and any like essay that could be either about diversity or YA, I was doing it. So like everything that was related to it, because I've been reviewing those books and reading those books and I knew so much about them. And it's always intrigued me as like a reader and a reviewer, like why is there such a lack of diversity? And especially because in more recent years you can say that there's been somewhat of a growth. Like you can see like books like The Hate U Give, which became insanely popular, like it's a bestseller everywhere, yet somehow like when you look at the figures of like diverse books being published, they're not changing, even though you think that there are more popular ones out now. So doing my dissertation, it kind of led me into different ways because the topic is very broad, YA books and diversity. Like there are so many different angles you could go down. I decided to specialize in the sort of people of color representation because you could do a whole other thing with like sexuality and gender and disability. Like it's, you can do entire dissertations based on just those. So I was like, I'm just going to focus on people of color because I am obviously a Muslim woman and I wanted to see what that was like. I mainly decided to touch on sort of the authors and like the representation of authors of color within the industry, the characters, and also in terms of the people working in the industry, like how diverse it was inside. It all started with this sort of theory that comes from a publishing theory about fields, how there are 3 different fields. You've got field of creation, which is like authors and when they're writing the books, production, which is the publishers, and then reception, which is reviewers. And I read this article where they were like, which, like, who is to blame for the lack of diversity? Is it the authors, the publishers, or the readers? Because everyone argues that it's the others in a way, because authors will argue that publishers don't want to produce them and the readers don't want them. Publishers argue there's no authors writing them and the readers also don't want them, and the readers will just argue that there's no authors and no people publishing them. So it's came from there, be like, is there someone to blame or is it just everyone? And I came out with, it's just a bit of everything really, because you just have so many different things, so many different factors that play into it, a lot of sort of gatekeeping and like, oh, we already have one book by a Black author coming out, we can't have another one. It's a lot of stuff like that and a lot of different things that come into it, because there's so many, like with most like representation, like intersectionality is such a big thing, and that's something that's so difficult to explore in an essay and a dissertation, to be like, it could be this, but then there's also so many other factors at play, so it could be like a bit of everything really. So that's kind of where my dissertation led me to.
Yeah, it's this like idea around everything being like a bit right, everything being a bit wrong, and everything being too right. I'm quite interested in, so out of your dissertation and also being the only person of color on your course, when these kind of conversations came around, And obviously I know that from your perspective, it may not have ever even seemed like, oh, I'm picking this thing, right? Because it's just the things that you're interested in and from your own experience.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there were points where you were the person that people were looking to for answers around this thing, especially being the only person of color, and then also just being interested in what you're interested in?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think mainly for the YA side, like that was quite good because I was really the only one sort of reading YA. But I did find that whenever like topics of diversity came about, it would always be like me talking about it because they would all just look at me. Because when you like, I did a 3-year degree about publishing. When you're talking about publishing now, you kind of have to talk about diversity in like every aspect, whether it is the books itself or like the people working in it. Like there are so many aspects that are affected by diversity. So it was like a lot of times I was arguing. I was quite lucky. I feel like a lot of publishing people are a bit like open in a way, like then there weren't many, like there wasn't a racist in my class basically or anyone arguing like against me, but I was just the one with most of the knowledge on it. It was a bit different because one of my lecturers worked in publishing and she is disabled, so she had a lot of representation to talk about with that. So we would have a lot of conversations together about how that's an entirely different thing that I don't know about. So that was quite interesting. But I did find that I quite liked having those conversations at uni because my class was quite small and it was something I knew a lot about and that I was really passionate about. I love talking about it because I'm so passionate about it. But it was quite like funny when we were talking about dissertation topics and everyone was like, yeah, we already know what yours is going to be about because it's like what I'm known for. Yeah.
I think there's something quite interesting in like in academic spaces where you almost can have those conversations because there's already like there's already a need and a want because everyone's on this course trying to learn something, right?
Yeah.
And I think with that you then get a space to kind of explore and understand more of like what your thing is. And what I've kind of found as well is often if you are like the only person of color in that space, but it's also your passion, speaking about that isn't something that's like, it's almost something that's second nature, right? And I think sometimes it offers a space not only for other people to learn, but for you to also like theorize the things that you already know and use that space to kind of to grow within that.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, you know, we speak a lot about and especially within publishing right now, there's like lots of conversations around if we are speaking about people of color, whether that's authors, characters, or just like diverse voices in general.
Yeah.
Especially in kind of like the realm of anti-racist books that are like quite popular right now. I think there's conversations around kind of, well, the education is there, right? Like people are writing about this stuff, and I think when you're at uni in more of an academic space, like yes, we all know those resources are there, but I think it's more of a melting pot for you to kind of like explore that.
Definitely.
Whereas right now, I feel that I don't know. I think it's interesting when we talk about resources when it comes to books, especially when it comes to anti-racism. And we've kind of touched on this topic in this series of on the SETI as well, where we also still need to like be in a place where we're having these conversations, right? And we're like allowing writers, like authors, to explore their passion and not always have that seen as kind of like, okay, well, this is the new like anti-racist book, but actually it's like, this is the experience of this person.
Yeah. Definitely. Because something I touched on is that a lot of authors of color feel like they have to talk about certain things, like when they're writing the books, they have to talk about the racism, where sometimes they just want to write the same fun like fantasy books or romance books, like random books that they just want to write, but then people like the publishers are sometimes like, well, what's the point? Like we want to see more of your experience. And it's like, well, we can just have nice, happy, fun stories that
Right.
have nothing to do with racism or anything like that. Like, they don't have to be so depressing, because I find that a lot of the times ones that are feature people of color and that are written by people of color are just so like exhausting mentally. Like when I'm reading them, like sometimes you just want to read something fun that is like, that's all it is really, especially with YA, because a lot of the books are just fun. So
Mhm.
you want that to be a part of it.
100%. And actually, I think within like the YA genre, I guess there's more space for that, right? To just like explore and like play and like what does it mean to just like just speak about like a character just like absolutely love, like whether that's someone who's like a teenager and like almost like tapping back into what that means, I guess. So I wanted to actually speak a little bit about Talia Hibbert. Right. So I only know about Talia Hibbert because you told me about them before. But I think what I find interesting and what I've kind of like read up on her and about her is this idea, exactly what you're speaking about, right? Just having like these books that are, Talia Hibbert is a Black British woman, and having these books that are just like about kind of like a bit of romance, right? A little bit, a little bit of this, and almost like having these really honest, normal and not to say that obviously speaking about like racism or anything like that isn't normal. Like, of course it is, because people's experience. But I think the other kind of aspect of it is like, that is something that kind of like intrigues me. I'm like, oh, like Black race, like romance, like and there's something really really beautiful about that. And actually it's like the pull is very different.
Exactly.
And that in itself is really, really wonderful. Have you like read many of her books, or do you know kind of about her through like just the fact that like she's doing something that we're like, hey?
I read quite a few of her books. She has like a trilogy called The Brown Sisters, which is about 3 different sisters. Each book is about a different one falling in love, and I always love to read those because I just find that whilst we are all different, like it just shows that we all have similarities. Like, even though they are Black, they're still falling in love the exact same way that everyone else does. Like, there's no difference to it. And she also has different representation. Like, she has an autistic main character in the third one, which I recently read, and then it has male anxiety and chronic illness. But it's just, that's just who they are. But they're still having a normal love story that is cute and romantic. And I think that's what's important. It's showing those without it being so like rooted in like the Black experience, just having a romance that is something that everyone can relate to and understand, and they just happen to be diverse characters. And I love reading those, especially because I find that with Muslim characters a lot of the time, a lot of the books are about like Islamophobia, like they're facing Islamophobic remarks. I'm like, sometimes you just want a nice like story that is nothing to do with Islamophobia, because I don't want to read about it most of the time, because it's life at the end of the day. So I think it's important to have stories that show the similarities. So that's why like Talia Hibbert is so popular. Like, her trilogy is so well known, and we're getting a lot more diversity. I think particularly in the romance sector of YA and adult romance, like they seem to have more of a focus on having diverse romances, and I love that.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned like the different types of characters that are like in the books, right? And things that like are being touched on, like chronic illness, like autism and but those things not being the center of the story. And there's something really beautiful about that, because I think that's kind of like how life is, right? Like, you have all these different parts of your identity, but that doesn't mean it doesn't always mean that one part is the only part that we show.
Exactly.
We're like layered human beings, right? And I think that's really, really cool. And I'm kind of drawn to those areas now, just because for me, I was reading like a lot of like anti-racist anti-racism books and things like that, because I was like, I just want to know the facts, I want to be armed with
Yeah.
it. But then, you know, there's other books that I've read, like one of my kind of favorite kind of books at the moment, well, not at the moment, but that I read and still consistently think about, is Back in the Frame, Jules Walker's book, which I think is like really amazing because it's just about her experience with cycling, like a Black woman
Yeah.
experience in cycling. And I'm like, oh, this is great, because like,
Yeah, definitely.
you know, and obviously, you know, the book is about her experience and she touches on certain things, but as a whole, it's just such a book that is making me see someone in their whole entirety. And I think that itself is it's just really like beautiful to kind of tap into that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So my next kind of question is, what are some of the projects or organizations or work that you've done that is literally like your heart work, like you are like, oh, this is the thing, right? Like what are some of those things?
Well, I'm really proud of my dissertation. I love it. But I was actually thinking recently, because yesterday it was a year since I submitted my dissertation. And I was thinking about how much of it had changed, like how much has changed since then. Because last May, like the increase in sort of the Black Lives Matter movement and how much that changed publishing, and also discussions around trans representation after all the JK Rowling stuff. And I actually quite am thinking about like going back into and like just researching that to see how much of what I actually wrote at the time still fully applies and whether it has actually changed, because that's something I'm really passionate about, is just keeping on top of that to see if it is making any difference, if anything's making any difference, because I don't think it really is that much changing in terms of like the publishing scene. But I feel like I'm quite passionate about a lot of things I've done. I worked with Knights Of for about 4 months last year, which was it's a diverse children's publisher, which is like both diverse in terms of the people who work there and also all the books they publish. And that was really interesting to work there to see how much, like what it's like being part of a small inclusive indie publisher and sort of the challenges they face on a day-to-day basis, because it's so entirely different. And now that like I have a full-time job, I see how different it is for them, like what they have to fight back against constantly. And I love them, they're such great people. So what they do is fantastic.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I love Knights Of. I think they're doing some really, really great work.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
Like being diverse in terms of like team, in terms of the actual things that are being published. It's like this real beautiful kind of real connection, right? It's like this is what we stand for, and we stand for it on all these layers and like levels we're doing, which is pretty amazing. So Knights Of are based in London.
Yeah.
Okay. So you are based in Birmingham. You're here.
Yeah.
So what is your kind of experience or impression around publishing, not just like in Birmingham, but like the West Midlands? Like, what does that look like? Because when I think of publishers that I know, they're not necessarily where we kind of are based.
Yeah. Birmingham always gets missed out with it, because one of my classmates, she actually did a dissertation based on why publishers are all in London and why it's so London centric. And Birmingham always gets missed out because now a lot of publishers are moving, they're opening offices up north. Like 2 of the major ones, Hachette, are opening, I think 6 offices up north in like Sheffield and Manchester. I can't remember the others, Newcastle's one of them. But I feel like this pandemic has taught a lot of publishers that they can do it outside of London, because the whole thing is that, oh, you have to in London, that's where all the opportunities are. But this has proven that we can all do it from wherever we are. Like, we don't all need to be in one like city. I know that my office, I will be moving to London eventually, but like they plan on it being hybrid, and some people are staying remote because we've proved that we can do it remotely. We don't need to be there. But I do think the fact that publishing is so London centric also is a reason as to why there's somewhat of a lack of diversity. Because
Mm.
even though London itself is quite diverse and like the population makeup there is much more diverse than like the general population, it like the publishing scene is very middle class because the wages aren't that high, like they are quite low. So the only people who can really afford to fully live in London on a publishing wage are the ones who come from money. Whereas if you have more opportunities in the north where it's cheaper to live, you'll get more diversity, you'll get more people who want to work in the industry and therefore can afford to if they don't have to be in London and pay the extortionate living prices that are in London. So I think that's part of the reason, really.
There's always conversations, like always, around proximity, around kind of, you know, the like ecology of like where things are placed. And I think there's something quite demanding, I think, about that conversation, because so many things to unpack of like, you know, we say, okay, cool, London's a capital city, so kind of like makes sense that things are like, but then I think often we don't necessarily like break down what is actually interacting with like with each different kind of like industry or like within the creative sector that's actually making it so like divided and not kind of across the country. I think this is a conversation that we have just a lot generally within the arts and the creative scene.
Definitely.
Kind of like, why is this not happening? But I do think there's something in what you've said around kind of who can afford to like live in London, being a job on a like work a job on a certain wage and still kind of like, hey, I experienced this my favorite, right? Like it's really a big thing. And I guess some of my like hopes and dreams are for kind of more publishing or more kind of like even independent publishing like happening kind of in the West Midlands. There's a lot of voices, right? And like we know this, but I think when that starts to kind of like spread and like open up a bit more, I think the like not necessarily just like the qualities, not that, but like the quantity of stories and like how deep they are like rooted into people's experience, because someone feels like they can speak about this thing and they can write this thing, and not feel like, oh, I have to move city or I have to, you know. I think that's like my hopes and dreams, that like we get to go through, we're like, oh, we could have other things too.
The Birmingham book scene is weird because I was even looking at like independent bookshops. We don't have many in Birmingham compared to all the other cities which seem to have loads. Like I think there's one that I know of, and even then that's like a pop-up bookshop that comes randomly. And it's weird that we don't really have that kind of scene, considering like our Waterstones in the middle of Birmingham is massive, it's huge. And there's such a demand there. Like I've been to so many book events there where there's like I went to one where like 1,000 people turned up, like it was crazy. And they have a demand for like a more prominent book scene here, but we just don't seem to have it, and I don't really know why.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I've really started to see that through this series, especially when it comes to like independent like book sellers, and also I think a big thing is where we do have like that kind of like very small niche scene in Birmingham, it's still also like, okay, but like who is it that are selling those books? Like, you know, there's still kind of the conversations around race, the conversations around privilege, and that in itself is such an important, integral part of the conversation, even if people are selling books that are diverse. But it's like, how are we also like making this trickle down into who has access to those books, who has the time to be a bookseller like 100% of their time, right, and be able to kind of survive on that. And I think it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Definitely.
So the hopes and dreams for Brum, please, more
Hopefully at
Sellers
some
and
point in the future.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really like hope that happens.
Because we have such good connections with London as well. Like you can get to London in like just over an hour. Whereas if I'm living in London, like even getting within London might take me like an hour on the tube and the bus anyway. So it's like you can get there at the same point. So if you need to. But then again, this pandemic's proved that you don't really need to.
This is the thing. This is the thing. The pandemic is really just like, brought up so many questions, right? And I think people have found lots of answers to them as well. And a lot of that is that we are very, very capable of doing things in a different way and reimagining and trying.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. I always hope that it kind of continues in that way as well, and that we like remember all the lessons we've learned. I think that's been like insane for like the whole of like the pandemic. I hope we remember the lessons we've learned. I hope we
yeah, because then if in a year we're back to how we were before and no one even pays any attention to what's happened, it'll be sad.
Exactly. So how do you think we start to equip like YA authors with like better systems and better resources for them to kind of feel that they like can hold that space and explore not only like publishing their work but also just explore their creative practice as well? What do you have any thoughts around that?
I feel like there need to be more like spaces for a lot of YA authors or just aspiring writers in general to just work creatively in a group of other like creative people, that like giving opportunities to people of color or diverse people is so important. I know some people will disagree with having like schemes just for diverse authors, but I feel like at the point we are now, we kind of need it because we need that little bit of a push to show like kids and teens and younger people that like, you know what, you can still write stories and there is a chance you could get it published, and just giving people the resources in terms of like a community, like having a community, because I know a lot of like white authors I know have like writing groups that they go to where they bounce off of each other, but it's quite hard to have like bounce your ideas off of each other with like say if I was writing one and it was with white authors, they wouldn't fully understand certain things. So it's good to, I think we need spaces where people can be creative just separately and have that freedom, because I feel like as well a lot of the times when you get into like adulthood, you don't really get a lot of freedom to be creative in any way. Like you don't really think about it. You're just like, we're all about our jobs and then just doing what we need to do to get through the day, but just showing people that, you know what, a creative outlet is possible and you can write these stories, and also just showing people that it is an option, like how publishing works, because it can be quite daunting I think, the whole process of getting an agent and then getting a publisher. Like it's quite a scary thing to go through because it's so many big decisions. So I also think a lot of thing is just educating people, like when they do like career days, actually showing people what it's like to be an author or work in publishing or anything like that will make a big difference, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because there's not only just kind of one route to go down as well. I guess there's like, the aspect of actually really getting into your creative practice. And like you said, having these spaces to just like play and explore and bounce your ideas off. And I think sometimes authors of color maybe aren't always afforded those spaces to just play and like and do that in a way that doesn't have to be like, this has to be like perfect, but actually can just be like, oh, maybe that thing didn't like work or whatever. But I also think some of those structures or spaces have to really become quite full of trust, I think. Because with anything where there's like gatekeeping that happens, and we'll go on to that very soon, but where kind of gatekeeping happens, there's levels of mistrust that like live there, right? So I think there's something about creating these spaces and making sure that the connection and like the understanding
Hmm.
of what is like really needed is embedded into what it is, so that, you know, if someone is creating something and it just doesn't like hit that mark yet, that it's okay, and to like
Yeah.
people to feel that that's okay. Sometimes I think that is, or can be, quite like lacking in like the creative scenes generally, because there's always a bit of pressure to put a thing out, right, and for it to be really great and for it to almost like represent you in like the best possible way, but actually there's a whole place.
Yeah.
And I think
Also the pressure that if you're spending your time doing something, it has to be something that's like has a finished valuable product. But even if it is not good, it's still something that is valuable to you because of the time you've spent on it.
right,
It's an important part of it.
really important. And I feel like sometimes when that aspect gets lost, and it gets lost not really of the fault of anyone's, but just the pressures that come
Yeah.
trying to get into an industry and trying to do the thing.
Yeah.
It's quite nerve-wracking. So yeah, you just mentioning these kind of like writing groups is like, I think,
Mm.
a really big thing to just kind of create space to just explore things on.
Yeah.
So I mentioned gatekeeping a little bit
Yeah.
already. So I kind of wanted to just get into that a little bit, because we can't like, just when we're talking about like diverse voices, inclusive
Mhm.
like spaces and voices, like there's always going to be the talk of gatekeeping, right? Because that's why the things are, why we're trying to push for
Yeah.
diversity, or trying to push against the gatekeeping to have the same opportunities. So what is your kind of understanding of gatekeeping, how that kind of plays out in like publishing or for authors?
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, what is that?
I just feel like with publishing in particular, there are so many different gatekeepers who control things. I mean, first off, you have the agents. Like finding an agent in the first place is so difficult because that person needs to like advocate for you. They have to really believe in you. And I have a friend who was going through that process and he was like, it was so hard to find someone who you think would actually believe in what you've done and who you are and will stand up for you, especially because like it's really hard to become an agent. So a lot of them are very white, like it's hard to find agents of color.
Mm,
So it's like finding a white agent who will still understand your story and understand like what's important, because there've been so many stories where like people have like authors have got agents and they're like, okay, you need to cut like this character out in this aspect or add in this aspect, and it's like we don't want to add in that stuff. Like they just see it as, okay, I know that, because from a publishing point of view, you're trying to think how you can sell this book to someone. The agent's trying to think how to sell it to a publisher, and their first thought is, oh, let's sell it based on who the author is and be like, oh yeah, they're like a Muslim person of color from a working class background, this is who they are, like, and that will sell it. And then they assume that that will be in the book. That's what publishers assume. Like if you're right, if you are a Muslim, there has to be Muslims in the book, it has to be about Muslims. And it's kind of hard to be like, well, why can't I just like, why does my book have to be so much about faith? Like it doesn't have to be, or about certain things. And then obviously the publishers themselves are a lot of gatekeepers. I feel like each department has its own thing. Publicity can be like a whole gatekeeping thing about who controlling who sees your book and who they like promotes it. And then the reviewers themselves are so difficult, I find, because as someone who's been part of the reviewing scene, like it's changed recently in the UK, but there's so much like white, but so many white books that get like publicized that don't really like stand up to other books, and so many popular books by authors of color that are just like being pushed to the side in terms of like marketing budget, and it just relies on like word of mouth and people promoting these books out of their own heart. Because I find that a lot of the books that authors that publishers are paying for reviewers to promote, they're very like mediocre books and not that good, whereas the popular books and the books that could sell significantly well are just like pushed to the side. There's no budget for it, and then reviewers can just control so many things. Like I think 2 days ago, there was an author on Twitter, a YA author, saying that they got an email and they screenshot the email, and it was someone saying, I really loved your book, but as a word of advice, it's not very like believable that your main characters are all people of color. You should change this. And it's like, why is the fact that first off they were coming at a place like, oh, I really love your book, I want your book to be better, that's what they said in the email. And it's like, why do you think you need to say that in the first place? But that's how like they've grown up in terms of what they think of these books. Like it doesn't make sense if every character is a person of color, because they've clearly grown up in a very white society where there aren't many people of color. Whereas I don't know about you, but I grew up in a place where almost everyone was a person of color. There were hardly any white people in my community. So it's a very different situation, and I feel like there's gatekeepers everywhere for it, and it's just like a lot of different people who are stopping these books from getting the recognition they deserve and they deserve. But that is sort of changing. I feel like TikTok is making a difference there, which is really weird.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, okay, so I have a question about this. So
yeah,
I what I've kind of found recently is like, and what I've been like thinking about more, so this is kind of like a two-parter. So
yeah,
the first bit is, why did you get into book reviewing, right? And then the second bit is more around kind of how or what have you seen kind of like change through kind of book reviewing, through like YouTube, like Instagram, TikTok, like how has like social media kind of like added to some of this? Because I've been seeing like some really, I will see like a kind of a really quick TikTok and I'm like, oh, that yeah, okay, cool, I'm gonna go look at that book now. Obviously all TikToks are quick, but you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like that in a lot of ways has become quite a trusted source, because so many kind of people that are saying like, I don't know, there's just a varied thing, right? So I don't necessarily feel like, okay, so this book is in the window of like Waterstones, that means it's the book to read. Right? It's more like, oh, lots of people speak about different things than I can pick. So how has that kind of experience been for you, being like on YouTube, being in the like reviewing community, and seeing some of these like changes?
Yeah, I think it's been like quite weird, because I feel like with TikTok, part of the reason why books become so popular and they become so popular, the BookTok users, the views that they get and the sales like impact that they have is insane. Like the best-selling YA book of this year in the UK came out 4 years ago, but it went viral on TikTok this year and everyone's been raving about it. It's been #1 for like most of this year, and that's a gay Latino book. Like it's madness how that book just went completely insane and no one could have predicted that. But I feel like part of the reason I find is that TikTok is sort of more natural in a way. I feel like a lot of the other reviewer spaces have been taken up with a lot of ads and sponsorships from YouTube, from publishers, where it's like, okay, I don't fully know what your opinion is of this, you're being paid to talk about this. Whereas with TikTok, it's a lot of reactions where it feels more genuine in a way. I find that is slightly changing, because you are seeing more like publishers take note of it and like having ads with certain TikTok users. But I feel like, and also the formats that they use, they're very clever in terms of they want their videos to be seen by normal TikTok users, whereas I feel like a lot of book community people on Bookstagram and Twitter and YouTube, they're just sticking to trying to get into the book world, the book community. They're not trying to expand out of that, whereas the TikTokers are using like current trends that are popular in like general TikTok and getting those views from people who have nothing to do with books. They don't watch the book videos at all. But that's, I think, had a massive impact. And I think that's kind of changed how reviewing has changed, because when I started I was 13 and it was very different at the time, and also it was very like white, like there wasn't much diversity. There's one book awards called the UK YA book blogging awards, and they had one award called Champion of Diversity, which is the only award ever that people of color were nominated for ages. Like you weren't at any of the awards, and you
Wow.
only really got nominated, like I got nominated once and I hadn't blogged in like a year and a half, but because some people were like, oh, I need to think of a diverse book reviewer, I'm going to put her. And I was like, well, I haven't done anything in a year and a half. Why are you voting for me to win for the last year when I haven't done anything?
Mm.
And it's, well, to be fair, most of the time the people who then win that award is like the one white person who's in nominated as well, because the year I was nominated, the one white woman won, and it was just a bit
Wow.
strange. But I feel like that is changing, especially with like, there were a lot of discussions last year within the book community in terms of like diversity, and I think it is slowly changing with TikTok in particular because of just the amount of views. Like no one on like YouTube or Instagram has ever got like 1 million+ views in a video the same way TikTok has. Like you're not getting the same reach at the end of the day. And the biggest, I think one of the biggest ones is a Muslim woman. There are a bunch of diverse TikTokers, like most of them are pretty diverse people.
Mm.
And it's just crazy how that's become so popular there, but it's something no one could have predicted.
That's the thing, like, because the way that we use the internet is like consistently changing, right? Like it's always in flux, it's always in, you know, ways that like you can look at something like, let's say like 3 years ago, right? So you can look at like Twitch, I don't know, 3 years ago or something.
Yeah.
And you can be like, oh, I remember when it looked like this and da 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 da. And then
Yeah.
and now it's like really rivaling with like YouTube. But then I think with like TikTok, we also couldn't have predicted that like TikTok would happen and people would use it in the way that they do. Like, because you can predict that like new apps are going to come out and people are going to be like, oh yeah, I prefer this because it has this feature and not that, whatever. But you said something about it being kind of more of a natural thing. Because so much of like our experience on the internet is kind of influenced by ads and things like that. I think with TikTok, it almost gives the kind of oh, I'm a person who could read a book and talk about this book, or someone that could just do that, and you don't necessarily have to be like within a community. Like I don't think TikTok is at that place yet. Like TikTok is like, you're a TikToker, right? Because you literally use the app and post things. Like, and there's something really great about that, because for me, it's something to do with not only like not having to have TikTok to see TikToks that relate or make you think about something in a different way. And I'm really interested in how kind of social media will continue to act as a little disruptor to these things. And the fact that like, you know, there are kind of spaces to kind of like do a book review or to just talk about like a book, or to speak about kind of like a funny aspect of it, or anything like that so quickly. And like you said, on YouTube, you're not getting those like levels of views, right? And what does that mean for like the reviewer kind of community now? Is there like a shift that has to happen there, or is the shift that like things are just changing and that's it? Like,
I think it is changing, because when I was starting out, like if a book publisher sent you a book, it'd be like, okay, we want a review that's at least like 500 words or something like this, and talk for it, or in videos that like talk about it for at least a minute and a half or whatever. But I think TikTok has shown that with like 15-20 second videos you can have a massive impact, and it has nothing. Sometimes it's just like, I think I was reading a New York Times article about it, and one of the most popular TikTok videos is just this woman being like, this is me before I read this book, and then this is me afterwards, and it's her just crying her eyes out, and that's all it is. And like that book is insanely popular now, like everyone loves that book, and it's just like, it's changed how we view reviews, because before it used to have to be very like formal, talk about the characters and the writing style and everything like that. Now it's just like, you can do whatever as long as you're promoting the book and being like, oh my god, I read this book, or however you want to do it. I just think we have a lot more creativity now with how we talk about books, which I think is making a big impact.
Absolutely. Like, and yeah, just like someone being like, here I am before, here I am after. It like holds so much, right? And it literally says like,
yeah, it says everything it needs to say. You don't need to talk about it.
it literally says everything. And actually, are we getting to like a point where when we are connecting with stories, like with authors, with our own experience, is it getting to the point now that we're like, we understand what it means to just see like an emotion, right?
Yeah.
And know that like, oh, I connect that, or actually now I need to know, like, am I going to read this book and cry? Like, you know, if there's something that like our like intelligence around like how we connect to stories is kind of like changing. We don't necessarily need to experience it kind of like in the ways that we have before. Because if I think about certain books or certain anthologies that I've read, let's say throughout school, because I did English literature and language at A level, and like for me, I loved dissecting. Like I loved kind of like being like, oh my gosh, this poem has made me feel this thing, and like it's connected to this thing, and that's a really important like skill, right? In terms of how you're relating to yourself as well.
Yeah.
So I absolutely loved that. But when I kind of left like that formal side of like education, I wasn't really in spaces where people were talking about books and poetry in that way. I was in spaces where I'm going to like a poetry night and I'm hearing like people's experience in a way that is like, oh god, like it was almost like quite like a full body, right? Or whatever. There was something there that was like that's the thing that I know now. And there's something really beautiful when you hear someone speak about their own work as well, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And like for me, if I like watch an interview of like, I don't know, Yusra Daily Ward or something speaking about like her work, I'm like totally taken aback. I'm like, oh
yeah,
this person is like not telling me about all aspects of the book or what they've written, but they're telling me about who they are.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, especially I find with YA, because with certain like with the more literary fiction books, people want to see like full breakdown of like, oh, this symbolized this and this. But with YA, a lot of the readers, like especially the younger teen readers, they just want like that feeling, being like, oh, this like made me feel this, or this was similar to this, and if you like this trope, you will like this. And I think that's what's quite different, is that we've kind of adapted how we review books to how like what the audience is like, because the teens that you're trying to get to within the like the TikTok space or whatever are very different in terms of what they're looking for in a book. And I think that's what like the TikTok side has got down, in terms of they understand that, you know what, they don't care about what this character represents or whatever, they just want a good fun time. So they want to be like, oh, this is like the most insane ride of a book I've ever read in my entire life. That's what they want. So
yeah, for sure. And I don't know what your feelings are about John Green, but I'm going to use him just for this reference because there's so many things I could say about him. But anyway,
yeah.
Maybe we'll but there's something about I remember reading one of his books when I think I was like 17 maybe, and I remember like sat in the living room and I'm like reading this book, like my dad's there, I was at my nan and granddad's house, like reading this book, and I'd been like, my head had been in it like all day, and I haven't read many of his books, but this particular one I was reading it, and like I just look up and I'm just like crying, right?
Yeah.
Like, are you okay? I'm like, the book, oh my god. And I'm just like out of like, this happened and I can't believe this. My dad's just like, take the tissues, man, because I can't with you. But there's something about that, like, and being like, when you're reading YA, like you said, it's that emotion, it's that thing that's gonna like hit a certain spot. And it's really interesting that someone like John Green was like so popular, because actually like he was romanticizing lots of wild things, right? Like in so many of his books, like, okay.
And a lot of his books were very similar. Like they had the same thing again and again. But I think that is part of the reason why, like some of my favorite books, if I look at them like more academically or whatever, and I'm like, you know what, like this is not objectively like a great book in terms of how it's written and how it works, but like the feeling you get when you read it is what you take away from it. Like with me, it's like that feeling of like comfort or whatever, and whatever you're looking for, like, oh, this was an insanely funny ride, or this book made me feel a lot of things, even if it was like written weirdly, or it's like I don't know how I feel about like the plot elements. It's just like this made me feel great and I loved it. I think that's an important part of reading, is just how you feel when you read it.
Oh, absolutely. And I felt that when I read Pet by
Oh yeah.
Akwaeke. When I read that, I was I felt like if I'd read it when I was like, I don't know, like younger than I am now. I'm 28 now, and
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know, 26 potentially,
Yeah.
or 28, 27, sorry. So if I'd read that when I was like younger, in like my earlier years of adulthood, I felt like there was so much of it that was like making me understand and feel certain things, but actually if I'd experienced that when I was younger, that there was something that would have been almost like unshakable in how I would experience the rest of my life, basically.
Yeah.
And there's something really like beautiful and like monumental about that, right? That like,
yeah, definitely,
who's into YA would read this book and be like, oh my gosh,
yeah.
like, and would kind of like blow your mind. I really like, I loved that book, to be fair.
Yeah.
I didn't connect with it in certain ways because I kind of was like, I think I know what's going to happen. I think I know
Yeah.
but I was like, this is a powerful book because it's like almost connecting people up with like little bits of like armor, right? To like
Yeah.
the world with. And I think that's such a like strength of like YA. It does remind me of like, it feels like it's giving people resources to just take on in life.
Yeah.
That is just like fun, or just like understanding like other people. But there's a beautiful strength in that, and it's just
Yeah, exactly.
appreciate so much. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah, because I recently read Mayhem Mission by Bahana Islam, which is like a book for the 9 to 12 range, more of the younger 9 to 10 sort of range. And it's just like sort of like Diary of a Wimpy Kid vibes, but with a Muslim boy in a Muslim household. And it's like, when I was reading it, this would have been such a big thing when I was younger, to read just a normal fun book of this kid just getting up to complete mischief. And that's what like, it's just, it made me feel happy because it's like, I know I would have loved this a lot when I was younger, and I've been recommending it to a lot of like sort of the younger, especially like Muslim male relatives I have, being like, this is such a fun read. Like you won't like pick up anything like any deep sort of meaning from it or anything like that, but you will come out of it and be like, it's just a nice fun adventure, and it shows that we can have the same fun adventures that everyone else can have. Because I didn't read a book with a Muslim character until I was like 16. So it makes a big difference when you read them from a younger age and you see yourself in these books from a younger age. And I think that also can lead to you then seeing, oh, I can write these books because I'm in the books.
Yeah, like I literally can write this thing. Like,
yeah, because I'm in them, so I can write them now.
yeah, absolutely. And like, you know, there's something about it being just normal. Just normal.
Yeah.
Oh, look, there's someone who's like me in some ways, maybe not a personality, or like maybe part of my personality, maybe just like how they experience adventure.
Yeah.
But just knowing that that person like is like you in some way, it's like unreal what that connection kind of means. And I guess this is also just a good point to just say that you will actually be in conversation with Verna about
yes,
about the book. And like, I'm excited to I haven't read Mayhem Mission anyway, so I'm excited to hear you two like talk about that.
I'm excited to talk to her about it as well.
Yeah, I'm really kind of, I'm always looking for books that I can like offer to like my nephew or
Yeah.
For someone to also like read a book that is diverse in the sense of just someone that isn't necessarily like you, but is like another person of color, or is like a Muslim character, or is, do you know what I mean? It doesn't always have to directly be you, but just to know that like we don't have to read all the books that are centered just around kind of particular characters that are often white, that are often a group of like, when I was younger and I used to read kind of a series of books that was like a group of like young white teens who were like off on adventures. It's like we can have that, but also just like they're like, you know, varied in their experience as well.
But also having more books that people can learn from as well, I think is important. Because I recently, a publisher reached out to me, and they published a sort of young teen nonfiction book that was called The Black Friend, on how to be a better white person, and it was a series of essays that was really small, and it was written for younger kids to understand racism. And I read it and I thought it was so powerful. I was like, there's nothing like this out there for like younger kids to understand it in a way that makes sense, and sort of things that they like in terms of like the N-word and cultural appropriation, where it's something they might not fully understand yet and understand what it's like. And they sent me actually 2 copies. They were like, we want you to give 1 copy to different people to like learn about. And I've given that to so many people and they've read it. And like, I gave it to my cousin who's 30. And she was like, I learned so much from this that you wouldn't think is like racism or whatever, but you just learn so much. I was like, it's so interesting to have those powerful books that you can be like, everyone should read these books because they're so interesting. And if I'd had that book when I was younger, it would have been a lot easier to understand, especially like if you're not Black, or even if you are Black, you might understand more about like why certain things maybe aren't appropriate for things to say, or what maybe if someone said something it's not great. Because one of the essays is about how he was told when he was younger, oh, I didn't know that Black people liked Star Wars. And it's like, well, why is that in the conversation we need to have? But that's why I find like that book so powerful and so interesting as well. It's like for the entirely different reason as Mayhem Mission, because it teaches you so much, but also like in a really easy and accessible way for young kids to learn.
Absolutely. And like we never stop learning, right? Like that's a big thing, like we never stop learning. And that is like one of the joys. I bought my baby cousin a book called like ABC, I don't know, it's like an ABC book basically. I don't know what the full name is, but I'd seen it before. But like within this book, it's like going through like the whole alphabet, and like you know, everything has like a different kind of like word. It's not your typical like, apple or whatever. And there's one bit in there at the end, and it's when you get to Z, and like basically I put this book down, and like everyone who was like at my aunt's house at the time, like everyone was like picking it up and being like, D for disability, A for and like flicking through and being like, okay. And then Z at the end is like it's Z, and it starts to talk about like pronouns and like the fact that some people use the as a like gender neutral pronoun, whatever. But even that is like quite interesting, because everyone can kind of look at something that isn't like, it doesn't always have to be aimed at you, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have really value,
impact,
like impact and knowledge. And one of them was like, I think L is like for LGBTQ plus. And my nan was just like, oh yeah, like I need to remember to add on like more the letters than what I usually say. And that's like my nan. And I said to her, yeah, you know, you can say like, you can add on like TIA, or you can just say LGBT plus. And it's like this one book, right, that is literally like a children's book, off this conversation with adults. You're never past learning. So I love like that you mentioned this kind of like, it's like anthology of like, you know, kind of stories that are just like helping us unpack like certain things, like this whole I didn't know Black people like Star Wars. That is really interesting, because it shows the blockers that come up for people, right? Like thinking about like sci-fi or and we know that like lots of the audience are like, you know, like white men or like white boys, stuff, but you know, so many of the people are also into it, and it doesn't just mean that what we see is all there is. And I think in itself is really beautiful. At the moment, I'm listening to Dawn by Octavia E. Butler.
Oh yeah.
I have like heard loads about like her as a writer, and like we just hadn't got into it. So I'm listening to it. I'm not reading it at the moment. And even to just have like a main character who's like a Black like human woman who's like basically living among like people that are seen as like alien or other. I'm like, that's really interesting. And you know what else is interesting? I can't stand Lilith's character. Like, she's like a Black woman, a Black human.
Yeah.
Like, oh God, I cannot with you. Like, you know, I'm like living for all like the other characters who are like othered, and like Ulor.
Yeah.
These like other characters. And that's actually quite nice as well, to read a book where I don't just identify with the main character because they're Black, or they're you know a woman or whatever, that actually I'm like, no, that's not who I identify with at all. And that's the beauty of like you know having stories with more diverse characters, because you also realize that you don't always identify with people who are like, similar to you, or certain.
And also, you don't have to like the characters, because I feel like a lot of people, in terms of representation, they feel like the characters need to be like the perfect model of that person. And I remember last year there was a book that was about asexuality that came out, and a lot of people loved it, but some people were like, oh, it wasn't how I experienced asexuality. And the author was talking about her own experience, and it's like, it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't, like, every Muslim character doesn't need to represent every single Muslim in the world. It's not going to happen. So it's also recognizing that, you know what, we can have books with characters who are flawed and not great, because that's what characters should be like. And it just feels like half the time the diverse characters have to be like the model minority.
For sure. And who the model minority, but I can't, it's too much. It's almost like not giving you like space to just.
We're also different. Like, I'm very different to a lot of other Muslims. So therefore, if I'm reading a book, I'm not going to be like, well, this isn't how I am as a Muslim. Well, those people are very different. Like, it's all very different experience.
And I find that as well, like if someone like meets me and they're like maybe more shocked that I identify as non-binary, because their perception of who is non-binary sometimes
it's very different
to like maybe someone who looks more androgynous or and there are lots of non-binary people who like look androgynous, and lots of non-binary people who look at all, right? And I think that in itself is like all part of the conversation of like where the intersex come in, intersectionality already, do you know what I mean? Like what are like the smaller kind of breakdowns.
Like, just because you've already had, like, as some publishers say, I've already had one book out by a Black author, the other book will be nothing like it. Like, they're so entirely different. Everyone is entirely different. We're not all telling the exact same story again and again, because that would be boring.
Exactly. And we don't need to. We just don't need to tell the same story. It's very much like, what does it mean when we are like genuinely giving people like the agency to show different parts of themselves,
show whatever they want,
and that might not even be part of themselves, as you said. It could be like whatever, it could be exploring just different areas of like a subject that maybe isn't the thing that I have a direct link with, but it's still something that they can speak on and have and
we're writing fiction, not autobiographies. Like, we can write whatever we want.
We want to explore, because
basically.
Can you believe we are at 3:15?
I know, it's crazy.
Oh my gosh, this always happens. But I just want to say thank you so much, Sophia. Like, it's been amazing talking to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a nice conversation.
I'm so glad. I mean, I just feel and I literally say this every single time. If anyone watches like to the end of like On the Settees, it's literally me just being like, I feel so grateful, like like amazing. I feel full, but I do, and I think I've really like just learning like a lot with these conversations, right? And thank you for just kind of like being you and being like, hey, this is what I do. And you know, I feel really kind of honored to have had this conversation today on this like nice little Saturday day. The sun's like come out a little bit, and I'm like,
it's quite sunny here. It's been very nice. We always learn more from every conversation we have, really. So
literally. So
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you, and I'm going to go and do my little outro and just kind of speak about
Mhm.
the next parts of ONCETI and some things
Yeah.
that you mentioned as well. So thank you so much. I
Thank
really
you for having me.
appreciate having you. Okay, so we have Sham on the SETI very soon on Saturday the 29th of May. So Sham actually runs a book club called A's for Activism along with Rabimbo, and a lot of kind of what they are touching on is about kind of justice, is about fighting for that justice and what that means, and how we kind of build resilient communities who are really informed about what we kind of do. And they're based in Birmingham, and I'm really excited to kind of be speaking to another person who is like in Birmingham, like using books in such a really powerful, committed way. And I also want to say thank you to Nikki B, who has like produced and like curated this series and kind of put this together in a way that we are not just kind of just speaking about books, but speaking about kind of books in a way that explores proximity to our city, like in the UK, what all of that kind of means. And as I mentioned as well, Sophia will be in conversation with Barana, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, speaking about oh my gosh, the titles are just leaving me. Let me just get this book title up. I apologize. So it's called Mayhem Mission. Got there in the end. So Sophia will be back with us, but it will be part of the Beyond Books series, and that is happening on the 13th of June. So please put that in your diaries, go on our website, book in. And yeah, so thank you so much. I'm going to leave you with this holding screen so you can jot down all the dates to check out where you can listen to the rest of kind of the On the SETI season and all the things that we've done before as well. So thank you so much.